appears to be making overtures to Saudi Arabia to improve relations, but the latter has rejected them as laughable. What is behind Iran's apparent change of position? Is there any hope of a rapprochement anytime soon? And following the success of a Chinese online rap show, hip-hop is making inroads into Chinese youth culture. I'll be asking why what started as a form of street culture in the US is becoming so popular in China. Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. On Tuesday, Iran thanked Saudi Arabia for running a successful Hajj pilgrimage that took place from August the 30th to September the 4th this year. The Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif had earlier stated that Iran and Saudi Arabia would exchange diplomatic visits soon after the end of the Hajj. However, Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir on Tuesday denied any warming of relations, claiming that Iran's comments were laughable. With so many elements playing into the bad relationship between the two, why did the Iranian side appear to be waving the olive branch? And what message does the Saudis want to send by using such undiplomatic language? I'm pleased to be joined from Durham University in the UK by Professor Anush Ehteshami. Professor Ehteshami, welcome to our program. First of all, why do you think Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif extended the olive branch at this moment? Now, Iran has been a big critic and rival of Saudi Arabia, and Mr. Zarif is also a very experienced diplomat. It would be an embarrassment to reach out without knowing the other side's position. Why did you still make the move?
I think that's a really interesting question. Since Mr. Rouhani's re-election earlier, in the last few months and so on, where he's been putting his cabinet together and his strategy, his government has been emphasizing the need to reach accommodation with Iran's neighbors. As you know, they've improved relations with Turkey, they've made considerable advances into improved relations with Afghanistan, they have a presence in Iraq, in Syria and so on. Saudi Arabia, in many ways, is the one which has been an outlier in terms of Iran's regional strategy. And in many ways, I would argue the future of the region hinges on relations between these two countries. So it made sense from Iran's perspective to use the occasion of Hajj to try and send a conciliatory message to Saudi Arabia in the hope of receiving one back, particularly as from Iran's perspective, they think that Saudi Arabia is now vulnerable, is vulnerable in Yemen, they think is vulnerable in Qatar as well, also in Syria, where Saudis have invested considerable amount of money, resources and support for opposition groups to the Assad regime, seem to be on the back foot. So Iran, in this context, felt that A, it wants to improve relations, and B, maybe to take advantage of what might seem vulnerabilities from the Saudi side to press home an advantage.
Some people are saying, for instance, observers here in China say, by making that overture, Iran is actually trying to show that it is the country of dominance in the region, or it might make itself look like such a force in the region. From an Iranian perspective, can we see that in this kind of move?
I would say it's more trying to appear innocent in this argument, that they can turn around to anybody and say that, look, we continue to make gestures towards the Saudis and they continue to rebuff our gestures, which means that we must carry on doing what we are doing regardless of Saudi positions. I don't think this was so much as a bid for hegemony, as it were, because Iran is very, very sensitive to accusation of being hegemonic and would not want to be broadcasting that in such a fashion. If they were going to do that, I think they would do it in a much more subtle fashion.
Now, Saudi Foreign Minister Al-Jubeir said on Tuesday, as I mentioned at the earlier in the program, that Iran's talk of a possible rapprochement was laughable. His reasons include that Iran needs to respect international law and Iran needs to change its policies before any rapprochement would be possible. From an outsider's perspective, from the reader's perspective, that sounds or looks like a slap on the face for the Iranians. What is Al-Jubeir, what does he want to say here? And is he aware of the kind of consequence of his comments?
Absolutely. Let me deal with the latter point first. you know, going back to 2014, 15, and beyond, actually, the language between the two countries has been really quite undiplomatic. They've said quite a lot of things about each other, and they've put in print. They've had a series of arguments in the New York Times against each other, for example, a couple of years ago. So his language is consistent with this trough that we found relations in. But going to your former point, in many ways what Jubair is saying is it's up to Saudi Arabia to set the terms of reconciliation and not Iran. What they're trying to tell the Iranians is that you can't broadcast friendship while you continue to do things in our interest in the region. And if it's only when your behavior begins to change from our perspective, it's only then that we will lift the curtains and try and improve relations with you. So what they're trying to do is in many ways to call Zarif's bluff and say if you want better relations, then in Syria, over Qatar, over Yemen, in Iraq and so on, show us a change in your behavior.
Instead of what you say. Now, also from the Iranian perspective, to hear this kind of response, do you think this would be seen as a kind of diplomatic failure on the part of the Iranian foreign minister or an embarrassment, or was he prepared for such a possible response?
Yeah, I think they would be preferred. In many ways, Foreign Minister Zarif was fishing. He was trying to use this opportunity, this occasion, to see what the Saudi response might be to an overture. And he's now heard that the Saudis are not interested. So they'll go back to the trenches and reconsider their positions and try and find another way of opening a door for dialogue with Saudi Arabia, because Iran is very conscious that it does need better relations with Saudi Arabia, or at least normalization of relations over oil prices, over the future of Syria, over what's going on in the Persian Gulf with regard to Qatar, over Palestine, over stability in Iraq, over confronting Daesh. There's a whole range of issues that the two parties share, if not a common interest, then at least a common understanding. And it's really important for Iran to try and begin to understand where the Saudis are coming from, what are the bottom lines, and how Iran might be able to ameliorate some of their concerns and fears.
I've just been told that we are joined from Amman, Jordan by Florence Eid Oakden, CEO and Chief Economist with Arabia Monitor. Madam, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. As we just heard from Professor Ehteshami, there seems to be so many factors that are pitting these two countries one against another, and yet it is important, it is vital that they find some form of way of rapprochement. Do you think it is possible at all in the near future that there will be a thaw of relations between these two sides?
I think it's certainly desirable in terms of the overall state of the region, because the lack of a thaw has created tensions that have accelerated in intensity over the past couple of years, and made some situations on the ground much worse than they need to be. However, the impediments to a thaw are many, and I think that certainly the situation with shrinking markets creates competition. So if we looked at this from an economics perspective, but also the regional circumstances are linked to international politics, and international politics may or may not favor a thaw at this stage. For example, it is amply clear that the Trump administration in the US prefers to be against Iran and is looking for reasons to trip up the Iran nuclear deal. This is independent of the situation in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar and in the Arab world. And obviously that sort of stance from the United States makes it harder for rapprochement to be achieved.
Well, another element let me bring in here is the conflict, is the development of the conflict in Syria. In recent months, we've seen more gains being made by the Assad government, supported by the Russian forces. And how is that going to make it even more difficult, if at all, for the two countries to warm their relations? Florence?
I think you're right in pointing out that it makes things extremely difficult. I'm terribly sorry, I couldn't hear very well your question. However, the Russian involvement in Syria has made the resolution of the Syria file a lot more difficult, not least because it has maintained the status quo ante. And so the hundreds of thousands of deaths in Syria have practically gone to naught because the Syrian situation, if resolved according to Russian preferences today, takes us back to the status quo ante. And in terms of the enmity,
Florence,
Iran
I was mentioning
and the Sunni world, it also.
I was talking about the gains made by the Assad government, also supported partially by the Iranian government, versus the losses suffered by the opposition forces that are partly supported by Saudi Arabia. So with the shifting in the situation on the ground in Syria, how does that affect Iran and Saudi Arabia's relationship in the near future?
Yes, that is precisely the point I was making. It's that because the Russians are firmly on the side of the Syrian regime and therefore against Iranian involvement in Syria, their involvement in the Syria file has made things quite a lot more complex. I think you're right to point that out.
Professor Ehteshami, what is your take on this question?
I think a lot is now hinging on Syria. But I think, you know, the war in many ways is not the real crisis that Syria is going to be facing. Once the war is over, in whatever form that may take, it's the putting together the Syrian state that's going to be mightily important. And if the Russians, for whatever reason, decide to walk away from that, I think it'll be the Iranians and their allies left holding the baby. And Iran has got none of the resources, none of the potential or the backing to try and rebuild the Syrian state. And frankly, it's not Iran's business. Syria remains a wholly Arab country. And to rebuild Syria, Iran must have the consensus of the Arab world to put it together.
Yeah, okay.
And the way that things are going, it's so wholly isolated that it cannot achieve that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Professor Anush Ehteshami at the Durham University, and Florence Eid Ogden, CEO and Chief Economist of Arabia Monitor, joining us from Amman. A quick first point, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson told a congressional committee recently that Iran's leadership wanted to extend its hegemony in the Gulf at the expense of Saudi Arabia. U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis followed up by calling Iran the most destabilizing influence in the Middle East. Most American defense experts now agree it was a mistake for the U.S. to withdraw its troops from Iraq in 2012. And Washington reversed course last year and now has some 5,000 advisors, trainers and intelligence specialists there with an eye on Iran's increasing influence. So if diplomacy does not soon lead to some kind of a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, armed conflict is not something that can be ruled out. You've been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. When we come back after a short break, an interview I did with two guests on the emerging hip-hop culture on the Chinese mainland. Stay with us. Hip-hop fashion and streetwear culture, though popular in the West, have never gone mainstream in China, but that may be changed thanks to a Chinese rap reality show called The Rap of China, which centers on Chinese hip-hop artists. With hundreds of millions of views since its launch in late June, the show has attracted huge attention, and it has put those rappers as well as hip-hop music into the limelight. How does the show make underground music a mainstream success? How is hip-hop influencing China's younger generation? I'm pleased to be joined in the studio today by Dr. Cao Peixing, professor at Communication University of China, and Ai Li, author and commentator and an online celebrity with 3.5 million followers on the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, that is called Weibo. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure. First of all, let's talk about this show called The Rap of China. In 3 months of time, hundreds of millions of views. Exactly how did the show transform the culture of rap from an underground culture into the mainstream limelight? Professor Cao?
I still think we need to wait until the aftermath of the popularity of the program to say it's become a mainstream program or mainstream culture or not. But at the moment, with the show, with the attention goes to the show, we can say it's really attracts a lot of attention. But it transforms the so-called subculture into a main culture. I think it's the multi-factors function. There are a lot of capitals invested into it, and the online show becomes a popular format. And the rap itself, of course, has a lot of funds. So all these functions and make it to become very popular. But I would like to see what happens after the show goes.
Yeah, definitely the huge investment, right? Hundreds of millions of Chinese yuan put in there, propel this culture into the limelight, let's say, at least. Ali, how do you look at the effect of this show 3 months into its broadcasting?
Yeah, I would say it's a huge business success. I would say, well, before the show, I mean, there is rappers and rap music and those cultures here in China, but it's not so obvious to the public. And I agree with Professor Tao here, and I don't think rapping or hip-hop is a mainstream culture here in China by far, but I think it's definitely part of it, one very, very interesting issues or factors of Chinese culture here. And I think one thing is very special about this show is that this show is very enabling. All of my friends or people I know after watching this show, they want to rap themselves. I mean, they want to say something with rapping style or let's say bits or features or everything. So people think that, well, maybe in the past rap culture or hip hop culture just belongs to a very small group of people, but now everyone can rap if you want to, even in Chinese. So that's something really interesting to see. And because maybe there's a very interesting line in that show, it's called "Do you have freestyle?" So it's like a greetings line here in China now. So
yeah, it's so popular.
Yes.
But let's look at the reason why it has become so popular.
Right.
Where's the trigger, you know, that it touched, that unleashed the kind of huge identification, let's say, the Chinese people, many Chinese people, if not the majority yet, that enable them to identify with it, Dr. Cao?
Well, let's see. I think it's popular mostly among young people, among the internet viewers, so who are also young people. So basically, hip-hop is a young people's culture. It involves a lot of culture, the subculture of the young generation. So they are very lively, they are very active. But sadly, they are still at the bottom of the society. They are very new. They don't have the power. They don't have the power to consume. They don't have the power in many perspectives of society.
Yeah, but I don't think I can agree with you. For instance, in America, where rap culture originated, or in Africa basically, but in America, that's where it became really popular. It belonged to the street, belonged to the underdogs, let's say, the people who are underprivileged. But in China, if you look at the people who are involved in rap music, who are engaged in rap music, I don't think they are disadvantaged. I mean, maybe that small group of people who are trying to make a name of it, but the huge followers, they are the rich second generation.
Yes. I would like to answer your question maybe in a different way, maybe in a psychological way. Right? I think that the youngsters here in China, they do have some angers. I mean, it's not huge. It's just a bit, maybe a disappointment about the society, maybe the inequality or everything. And rapping music or hip-hop music can help you to at least express some of your disappointment, and through a not so, I would say, violent way. Because if you look at all those lyrics of those hip-hop songs, they have a word called diss or disrespect. I'm just going to diss you. So I'm kind of angry, but I don't want to fight you. I don't like to do that thing to you with my words. So it's a good thing. I would say it's a good thing. It's a very healthy way to let out the fire of those youngsters. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's a tipping point. Because I would say this show was not so popular at the very beginning. At the very beginning, everyone was very skeptic about this show. Everyone think, well, really, we have rap music here in China? Really, do we have it?
Yeah.
But later, I think, I just mentioned that, this enabling factors, because everyone can do the freestyle, and everyone can say something or be angry about something, and the show is here, they are doing it on the stage, why don't I do it in my home? And thus, it becomes the tipping point.
That leads to my next question, which is, what we have seen a variety of online reality shows and on TV, but we have Voice of China, Songs of China, which is similar to what we have in the West, like America's Got Talent or American Idol. But what exactly is different about this show that makes it stand out from the other reality shows, especially on the internet?
Well, I think it is special. You know, the Voice of China, basically, or other shows, basically you instrumentalize yourself, you train yourself, you drill yourself, and until you really perform well something somebody created already. So you sing a song of somebody else, you dance a dance somebody created. But hip hop is different. It is very much related to your own life. So it express yourself. So you see those pop stars who enter the last round of competition, they really write their lyrics themselves, and they write about their own culture, their own life. So it's really connected with their real life. And as Ali said, it's express themselves, not only anger, but also resistance, also the mourning of the lost childhood, the pure childhood. So they have a lot of sentiments, and these are related to their own life. This differs itself from all these other talent shows. So this is really special talent show.
Ali, your take?
I would agree with Professor Tao. And I think, because I was on one of a very interesting show here in China, it's called Let's Talk. It's a debate show. And it's called 奇葩说.
奇葩说,
and also
okay.
too.
Let's Talk.
Yeah. So in 奇葩
Which is also very popular.
Very
How many
popular.
people are watching that? Do we
Wow,
know
well,
how
I would
popular?
say, in total, it may be viewed by, 20 billion times.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's,
What makes it so special?
I think maybe it shares something with the Rap of China, because it's very expressive. It's about ideas. Of course, in a debate show, in our show, it's just about ideas. So we encourage people to think. We encourage them to express their own point of views in a different way. And that's why that show is so popular, because it's enabling. It enables you to think. And for this show, the Rap of China, it enables you to rap. It makes you believe that you can be a rapper too, because those things are not that difficult. So maybe I think that's a very...
It's like an liberation.
Yes.
It's like a process of letting go your
Right.
inner feelings, which they probably never felt that they could do, maybe not with so much room, so much space. But again, how much need is there within the Chinese young generation, or the younger generation, let's say, to have that room? Because traditionally we are not known, the Chinese are not known for expressing ourselves, right? If you're in a family dinner, you shut up. The younger ones, you are there to listen.
Right.
So how much conflict, how much impact, how much sense of joy is that giving to the young generation?
I don't know we really understand our young generation anymore.
You deal with them on a daily basis?
Yes, they are born in the internet era. They have a lot of information around them, and they are very sophisticated in social interaction. They have social media, they make friends differently as our generation, and I think certainly they have a lot of demands, and they have a lot of things to say. But as you said, we have the so-called traditional culture to respect the order, So
harmony.
Yes. So this would be the great chance if they say it's encouraged to express yourself. So why don't we do it? So why don't we follow the formats? So that's what I think. I used to think hip hop is very small subculture, but when you see, it's easy in a way that you can just freestyle yourself, say whatever you want to say with little rhymes at the end, which is not difficult at all, and using some already existing music. So it perfectly fits this kind of needs that they have a lot to say, they are not allowed to say before, and now why not now? Let's do it through these formats.
How about the kind of negative influences that is always associated with hip-hop culture in the United States is also under certain criticism, that the cursing word,
Yes.
and the kind of sluggishness is my word from a mother's perspective, where you have to hold your pants everywhere you go. What about those kind of aspects of rapping culture? How is that already influencing our younger generation, Dr. Cao?
To say there is negative elements is very subjective.
It's very subjective, okay.
And we should ask a question from whose perspective?
I'm just asking a question from a let's say, a normal. Again, this is subjective. Okay.
You say.
Yeah, some people might find it offensive.
Yes,
Right.
of course I see certain perspective of the program itself or of the culture itself. For example, they use certain lyrics, that is slang lyrics or not very polite lyrics. That's part of the culture too, so we should be cautious about. But I think that, to me, that's not most negative part of it. What I see the most negative part is the over-commercialized formats of the show. So you see a lot of commercials going on between, in the middle and after the show. There are products embedded into the studio, into the rooms, into a lot of talkings, into the storylines of the, and I think it's simply too much. I'm not against commercials, which is very important to subsidize, to support the program and make it possible ever. But we should really limit the commercials, how it's expressed, how it interferes the storyline and how much it shows up. So otherwise, we are doing everything for the commercial itself, but I think we should focus on the culture, on the content itself, rather than those commercials.
But Ali, your point, I mean, you are very much associated with the online world.
Yes.
You are also associated with the commercial aspect of,
Yes.
of things. How do you look at it?
Well, of course, I agree with Professor Cao here. There should not be too much commercialization, but I think that it's not too bad by far. At least I think. Just look at F1. I mean, the Formula One, the race, the car race. You see, those people have commercials everywhere. They even have commercials on their face or something. I mean, the brand or advertising. So I think it's fine as long as the show itself has this essence there. So, but I do see the point. I do see why you worried, because there are some obscenity and there's some slang words.
I'm just voicing the worry of some people.
Don't
I'm
worry,
not
it's fine.
particularly concerned.
Yeah. I think it is true. It is totally reasonable for most of the people to worry about that. And it is, of course, part of the hip-hop culture. It always has something not so positive in it. But I don't think we should stop any, let's say, condemn the hip-hop culture itself, but rather teach our youngsters, saying that, well, that's everything. I mean, everything in your life, it has something positive and something negative. So what you have to learn while you're growing up is trying to tell the differences and trying to distinguish what is good and what is bad, and learn from the good and not copy the bad. It's the responsibility for the teachers to do it. I myself happen to be a teacher, so I teach my students that there will always be negative parts. So you have to pick it out and try to learn from the good.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
we have to leave it there. Time is up. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Anyway, Dr. Cao Pei-Xing, Professor at Communication University of China, and Ali, author and commentator and an online celebrity. Thank you. That was it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.